Good evening. My name is Peter Thompson, and this is the final episode of the Diaries, a series I started a year ago to document my attempt to get into the world of M&A. Buying businesses, being a professional investor, acquisitions, etc. I cringe a little bit saying these things because the reality is there is so much content now, podcasts and videos and courses of people trying to tell you how to do this successfully. And it reminds me a little bit of the gold rush, where the people that really made the money were the ones that sold the pickaxes. I decided to do something a little bit different. There'll be none of that bullshittery here. I did the courses to really share my failures, my little wins, and my slow movement towards what I believe now is a journey that to some extent has, and I believe will continue to change my life forever. It started about a year ago. It's not a coincidence, it's called Dragon Diaries. It was the start of the Year of the Dragon. My wife bought me this lovely gold coin. I am a dragon. And that's just ended. For those that know, the Year of the Snake came in on the January the 28th. So this seems like, for reasons, if you keep listening to this video, you'll understand that this is the perfect full circle moment where the Year of the Dragon has bookended this career pivot that I've gone on. So just a little bit about myself, first of all. I started working pretty early, right? Paper rounds, car washing. My brother had the more successful car washing business in the street than I did because, yeah, I didn't really quite have the patience for it. But suffice to say, I've always worked since a young age. When my friends at uni were in the main doing jobs at local supermarkets, etc., I blagged my way into doing IT consultancy work. I worked on what was the Apple help desk back then, a company called Socrates, in my summer holidays. I worked on the very first internet banking helpline that Alliance and Leicester started way back when. And so when uni was over, I thought IT was kind of the thing that I wanted to go into. After many consulting contracting jobs, when I was 21, I started working for an investment bank called Goldman Sachs. It was a really amazing time. I learned so much and worked with incredible people. But a lot of things happened during, that was the time of 9/11, and we had all sorts of things go on that I kind of decided that a career change was in order. Now, the trouble with working in an investment bank is, even now, the salary I earned a long time ago would look pretty good in today's market. And that is kind of the problem is, what are you going to do? I always knew I wanted to start my own business. But I thought it would be about my age now, when I had a few more grey hairs and people might take me a bit more seriously. But the reality was, it felt like the best way to do it. I knew I always wanted to do it. Pressure was there. So I picked this wonderful moment when my wife had just found out that we were having a baby. I had the biggest mortgage I'd ever had in my life, and I had the grand total of £4,000 in my bank account. So I went to my wife and I asked her if I could spend pretty much all of that money buying stock to start a business in 2004 called Cantrack. Well, it wasn't called Cantrack then, but it was ultimately called Cantrack, and was the business that I ran for many, many years. Learned so much, grew it probably way slower than anyone else. Well, not anyone else. Lots of people grow businesses, but I made lots of mistakes. That's the key bit, is most of what we do as we get older is just living and taking risk, because without taking a risk, you don't get the opportunity to make mistakes. And if you don't get the opportunity to make mistakes, you don't get the opportunity to learn. I know it's a bit cliched, but really, one of the most impactful things I've learned about this career pivot is the knowledge you need to change into a new career is quite minor compared to the experience you need just through living and making decisions and seeing how those things play out. And that has been a bit of an eye-opener in its own regard. So what did I do? Well, I won't go into all the details, but in 2013, I got my first investor into that business. I got, a good sum of money. It was some hundreds of thousands of pounds, but I sold half the business at that point. But at that time, my kids were young. They're now 18 and 19, one soon to be 20. And it was life-changing for us. We paid off a mortgage. It was like a bit of a dream. And I thought I kind of almost pinnacled of where the business could be. And it meant I took my foot off the brakes a little bit for a year or two. until I started realizing that my dividends had also halved and I was making very little money indeed. And it kind of got the bit between my teeth, not for the first time. I learned a lot of hard lessons with that business. In the first 3 months of starting it, I thought I had this thing figured out with my £4,000 investment, and I had one big client. And then they went into administration, owing me £20,000. And that might as well be in £1 million, because I remember, sadly not for the first time, going home to my wife and saying, I think we're going to lose the house. But in the 2 weeks that followed, I learnt a bit of backbone. I learned how to be tenacious, and I sold in a way that I had never sold before. And suffice it to say, I sold £20,000 in 2 weeks, which was probably as much as I'd sold in the entire start of the 3 months business before that. So again, challenges kind of help you learn a bit about yourself. So back to 2013, sold half the business. It changed my life. But I got the bit between my teeth to try and grow that business. And that really took another phase in 2018, where I went from it being a sort of a lifestyle business that was really nice to intentionally breaking that business down to its foundation and rebuilding it as a mini corporate, because I knew I wanted to sell that business. I hadn't started it intending to be in it as long as I had. I don't think many founders do. I just did something that I liked and ended up doing it pretty well. But it was that intentional decision to scale, bring in an organization chart that made sense, a management team, to make it that mini corporate, get the processes in place, really address the way that our go-to-market was working, pricing. And some years earlier, it was a technology and security business, shall we say. Some years earlier, I'd moved into a subscription revenue model. Luckily for me, a lot of life involves both hard work and luck. I might certainly acknowledge my fair share of luck. And that subscription model really made the business very valuable when it came time to sell it. So the sales is really important. The quality of the clients is really important. The ability for it to outlast the exit of the founder and how resilient it is to that person exiting is really important. Now, the things that I learned through what ultimately was my exit from that business really helped me now as an acquirer of businesses understand what I am looking for and what I need a successful business or an acquirable business to look like. Now, my threshold for what I want to acquire is probably a lot lower than others because I've been through that journey. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable in taking the kind of risks that involve the person who founded the business being pulled out of it. I sold that business in 2021. It was an 8-digit exit, made a lot of people some good money. I am and remain extraordinarily proud of the exit. And we were bought by a fantastic British company. It's well documented, so I can say it's a company called Radius, multi-billion turnover business, a British business. And crucially for me, it was still majority owned and very much operationally involved with the owner of that business, Bill Holmes. But it had a private equity company that backed it as well, a company called Inflection, great business. And it just felt like a good fit. Now, I did a 2-year earn out on that business. During that time, I really had my eyes open. So I really enjoyed the time there. I was pleased to see that I could work in a corporate environment. But what I did get to do, having gone through this incredible transaction process, and you really learn a lot through selling a business, not just about the process of selling, but interestingly, you learn so much about the business itself when you're viewing it through the eyes of the questions that are being asked of you, the data room that's being prepared, what people are interested in tells you a lot about what you're doing well and what you're not. And by that time, we were pretty good. We had good financial packs. We thought we were running well, but I still learned things that, and this has come to fruition in people that I now talk to, is through the process, you learn things about the business that makes you think, even if I don't sell it, I am going to take something away from this process. So during the earnout, one of the things that I did is I got involved with looking at a couple of companies because Radius were pretty acquisitive, and I was looking at a couple of businesses and asked for my input into whether there'd be good acquisitions for the team. And what was really interesting is the same deal team that have been involved in buying my business, I was now working alongside them and understanding what they were looking for and what they were doing. And it was a real eye opener. And I mean, one of the big things that maybe we'll come back to later was the concept of EBITDA arbitrage. And it's a fairly basic concept, but I think people hear it, but they don't understand how powerful it is. So let's say, for example, I'm really just plucking figures here, but let's say EBITDA and EBITDA multiples are, whether you like it or not, and there's many different ways to value a business, you can have whatever you want, but in the industry, it is just pretty much a de facto standard that people will use an EBITDA a multiple to value a business, or perhaps in the US you'd be looking more at a revenue multiple. But either way, the general concept's the same. And I'm not here to debate whether that's good or bad. But if you buy a business at 5 times multiple, let's say it's doing £1 million of EBITDA, you buy it for £5 million. Now you are a big company and you've got scale. Scale is one of the biggest value adds to a business. You know, if you look at private equity, they're not really interested into a business is hitting 5 million of EBITDA, and that's at the lower end of private equity. And they still need to know the scale and opportunity and good management team, i.e. really de-risk. They do not like the end of the market that I look at that involves in a lot of risk around management team, maybe not a management team, maybe just a founding exit. There's nothing that's going into the sausage machine of private equity. They just kind of wait until, like I did with Cantrack, you get big enough to be in that space. So those big companies that have got that scale, that go for high multiples, let's say, for example, they're a big company and they have a multiple on their EBITDA of 15 times. So if they are worth £10 million, if they are doing £10 million EBITDA, these are silly numbers, but they're then worth 150 million. What people don't realize is the second they buy a business that is doing £1 million on a 5 times multiple for 5 million quid, okay, that £5 million is now worth 15 times. So that 1 million of profit is worth 15 million to them on their balance sheet because of the multiple that they're trading at. That is EBITDA arbitrage. You haven't done anything to the business at this point. You have just bought it. But the second the asset of your business goes on their balance sheet, in many cases, they've made all the money they just spent on the deal back, because it's now part of a profit pool that is valued much higher than you were as your small business. And the reality is, for really small businesses, so typically less than £1 million of profit, the average multiple is somewhere between 2 and 4 times. That in its own right is a learning lesson. And I spend a lot of time talking to business owners these days about it, because there's often more value for younger business owners to keep their business unless they're in a number of sectors like technology or fast growth sectors where the multiple makes it exciting enough at lower numbers. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So I find myself, it's nearly 2 years since I left Cantrack and Radius, April 23. I took a long summer off. I've been running the business for 19 years at that point, and I took a well-deserved summer off, chilled out a bit too long. I started getting back into Jalex Futures and this idea that I had in October 23, but I didn't really get serious until April 24, hence around the start of the little after the Dragon's Diaries. But one of the things that's really weird to do is, when you're starting this business, you think, I'm buying businesses, I'm going to be doing all this stuff, all this business stuff. But the reality is it's like a startup. I sat at my desk, I had a computer and, empty desk, and I had no one to call and no emails to send, an empty inbox, my new email address. And I thought, so what exactly does someone do in this situation? Now, obviously, I'd spent months, even prior to that point, reading podcasts, videos, training. I did a course at Imperial College on mergers and acquisitions, which was really good and I enjoyed it, but completely inappropriate for the kind of market I'm operating in that small end of the market. But I learned and then got going. And I think that's probably the first thing I want to say is, if you don't know what to do, just start doing something. It's just like starting a company. When I went back to 2004 and I had this idea for a business, is what do you start with? Well, design your product, design your service, design your pricing strategy or whatever it is. And what's your go-to market? How are you going to get a sales funnel created? And who are you looking for anyway? So everyone calls it deal origination. Deal origination, what is it? Well, it's a really, really fancy name for a sales funnel. The only difference is in most products and services, your sales funnel will have X amount of people coming in. A friend of mine says that, right, it's 100 companies goes in, 2/3, you kind of discount the last third. There's an opportunity, and X amount of those you maybe get a deal done. Well, in this world, in acquisition and deal making, you're going to need a lot thicker skin than even your average salesperson. Anyone that's done sales knows that it is a hard game, and it requires tenacity, confidence, and the ability to move past failure and rejection. And buying a business is absolutely like that, but on steroids. So I gave some numbers a little while ago. Let me give them again now. I have contacted through various means, letters, LinkedIn, phone calls, email campaigns, and often at the same time, 4,500 businesses in the last year. Out of those 4,500 businesses, 100 people wanted to talk, and we did what's called a discovery call, where we find a little bit about that business. And discovery calls are so important, both for you in learning what it is that you want to ask about, refining your questions, understanding the things that you need to know that will rule that business in or out very early on. Out of the 100 discovery calls, I have put 6 offers all the way to spending money on legals and something called heads of terms. And out of those 6 offers, I had 2 accepted, 1 fell out during the process, and 1 business that I acquired. 4,500 down to 1. Look, other people are going to have less stringent criteria. Maybe they'll be more open to taking bigger risk on. I wouldn't say I was looking for some perfect business, far from it, but I was certainly looking for something that I'd be prepared to put my money into, because unlike other people doing this, and certainly I will be doing this in the future as well, but I actually wanted to deploy capital into a business, or at least part of the consideration myself. I wanted and needed skin in the game. And maybe I'm wired wrong, but I've always worked well when my back's to the wall and I'm really invested in something. And there were good financial reasons for me to do it too. But I'll come back to that. So deal origination is a sales funnel. How do you do it? Well, there's loads and loads of sources of data out there. You need to try, you need to buy, you need to find out what you need, what items of data help advance your purpose. So there were things for me, for example, I wanted to know the formation date of the business, because I needed to be able to run analysis on my data and enrichment, which I did, which I got from multiple sources, combined together, enriched it. The better data you put in at the beginning of that process, the better results out. And you can tell from the 4,500, these were not highly researched, each one of these businesses. It was researched and sector specific and detailed enough for me to think I like the overall shape of this business. But other than that, it was all about generating inbound and then following up really, really well. And I also then later started doing outbound on some of the statistics I got to see when people show me they were interested in my letter or my email, etc. I could detect that and then treat them like hot leads, basically. So age of the business was interesting to me. Turnover modeling, really notoriously difficult, but again, interested. I wanted to know number of employees. I wanted to make sure that I could tell from the balance sheet. Balance sheets are very hard to read on their own right. And for those in the know, certainly in the UK, there is going to be an increase in transparency soon, where even small companies are going to have to start posting their P&L to Companies House, free to search for anyone, just like they currently do with the balance sheet. That is going to make the work of myself and people in this industry an awful lot easier in terms of modeling who they want to talk to. As it is kind of aiming at the dartboard with a slightly wavery hand, but it's worth putting time into this. I enriched the data to get email addresses, telephone numbers, etc. So good in helps get good out. So on those discovery calls, what are we trying to find out? Well, there's always a number of key questions for me. I want to hear a little bit about how they started a business. I want to hear a little bit about their story. It's one of the things I get the most enjoyment out of this new career in is I love business. I love hearing success stories about founders that have taken risks, really made something out of their lives. And I always enjoy talking to those people and finding out how it started. I get a flavor for them during that process as well as the business. And I will tell you one thing I've learned pretty early on. If I have a bad discovery call with someone I don't like, if I'm honest with you, and I don't like the way they're talking to me, I don't like the way they talk about their business, and they're putting up bad vibes, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. I've learned the hard way that that if you don't like them on a discovery call, you are not going to make it through a transaction with them. So I know it sounds like a silly point, but believe you me, it is important that you like them and they like you. And businesses are very personal. I really cared about who I sold my business to. And I know most of the people I speak to do as well. And having been through that process, I think I'm able to connect with them better. They can see the battle scars on my face and they know that we've been through something similar. So once I've got all this data, I then do a combined outreach. That involves letters, a timed email campaign, very well crafted, hopefully, but I change it slightly every time based on feedback. And I do ask for feedback about why people call me. It's just like sales again, why did you buy from us? Why didn't you buy from us, etc. So I'm learning all the time and improving that process, but the response rate is getting better and better and better. And you can turn that tap on and off depending on how much deal flow that you want to get through. And it is important that you get as many opportunities and inquiries as possible, because like I just started another outreach in January and I'm just buzzing because I got so many meetings with people, opportunities, really exciting businesses. I love the fact in this industry that you can wake up in the morning and have no idea that by the end of the day, you've had a meeting with a person running a company in a sector you don't know anything about, a business that you never would have thought about, and now you're really excited. There's a powerful sense of excitement about this business you found because you really like the sound of it. Now, going through the process that I'm going to take you through, each stage is a stage where I think you're going to just swipe that business out. You keep proceeding until it falls out the process. Either you make it fall out, it falls out, the owner makes it fall out. One of those things happen. You just keep stepping forward until that happens. It's the way to think of it, and you have to have kind of thick skin. This is, as I just said, from that sales funnel and how little gets out the other end. Perhaps if you've been involved in a commercial setting or a sales setting, you're going to find this a little bit easier, because if you're sensitive to rejection, I think you could find this quite hard and demoralizing. I'm a pretty steely character, and I cannot lie, I have found it at times very difficult and thought, am I ever going to get anywhere with this? And I have. Long story short, in a year I've done all right, and I'm going to take you through that as we go through the next part of the process. So, do I like the owner on discovery call? Yeah. What's the commercial? What's the kind of the customer journey? I like to touch into that a little bit, like what's actually going on in that business. But crucially, I want to talk about financial. I want to talk about financial fairly soon, because I am looking for profits in excess of £500,000 of operating profit. You'd expect the EBITDA in most cases to be higher, quite a bit higher than that. There's add backs and things that I'm not going to go into because it's a whole bit into itself, but you need to be able to evaluate a business's finances. Now, you can look at it on a really basic level. Really small businesses might even know those numbers anyway, but over £500,000 to £1 million plus, people typically have got a better grip of at least their P&L, even if in a lot of cases of that size business, they really don't know or understand much about the balance sheet, which is one of my real favorite go-to places now. So I like my finances, which will make my old, shareholder from 2013 laugh, because, I was terrible years ago. I have had to teach myself, and I'd suggest anyone that wants to get into this seriously really does need to teach themselves. You need to understand finance. That is just not to say, though, you can do all this stuff on your own. Once I've vetted opportunities and I've got through a discovery call and they're still in process, I still like them, I am asking to follow up with some more detailed financial accounts. So typically statutory accounts over the last 3 years, the full accounts, not the stuff you find on Companies House. If they've got management accounts, great. And I need an up-to-date balance sheet, because the balance sheet's going to tell me an awful lot of stuff. Now, I've got a partner that I work with that once it's past my checks and I'm not wasting his time, I will pass that information over to him, and he will do in an evening what, well, frankly, I couldn't do it if I had a lifetime. So he's got an eye for looking through these things that I don't have. And I guess it brings me on to one of my next points that I'm going to come into a little bit more later, which is about the people that you surround yourself to get this done. Is if you try and skimp and save, if you're posting all your own letters and writing them all out by hand, and you're trying to work it out, but you don't have financial experience, you're really probably not going to do well in this. You need some level of professional advice. Now, you can sweat it like any entrepreneur does, and you can do what you can to minimize those costs, but do not fool yourself that you possess all of the skills to go from nowhere to owning a business. You are going to need, as we'll go through, multiple professionals in that journey, and they're going to be super helpful to you. So once we go through that discovery phase, once we've had a look at the overall business, I write copious notes. I've got tons and tons of discovery calls that I've got notes from on that business, all typically asking the same sort of things, building up a picture that I can refer back to, because believe me, people do come back to you, and I go back to them, and I've got all my notes there about the conversations, why I didn't take it forward. A lot of the time, actually, now it's me kind of actually pushing them out that process fairly early on, because I've got a little bit more experience in terms of what I'm looking for, how it fits my strategy as I've now developed it. And those notes are something that I hand over with the finances to the chap that looks at that for me. He provides a view, and if all is still looking good, it's time for a face-to-face meeting. Now, I've done a lot of those face-to-face meetings, but as I said, only 6 went to heads of terms, and of which some of them I go to heads of terms, and the heads of terms is this first document. Most of it is not legally binding. The legally binding bits are actually around things like exclusivity and confidentiality. There's a few clauses. I'm not going to go into too much technical detail, but most of it, really, think of it as like a proposal for the purchase of your business. A lot of it's around good faith. It's about you and the vendor agreeing to these general terms, which are used as the basis for the transaction documentation if you go ahead. Now, I'm going to come back to that later, but transaction documentation is where you start spending real money. So my advice is often to get as much in the early heads of terms as you can. Discuss as much as the stuff that you know is going to be tough, and the more you do this, the more you realize what the tough things are going to be, and bring it into that heads of terms document. So I spend a lot of time on pre-DD, getting the heads right, and that will make the chances of something falling off once you really start spending money lower. That's the aim. So, I know that there's whole strategies around there from people that are perhaps less scrupulous, which has never been in my way. I've always run businesses ethically, where I'm open, perhaps too open sometimes. People head to Dragon's Diaries. But I find it's a really good way. People buy into trust and honesty. They can kind of feel it inherently when someone's been a bit sharp. So I explain why I'm doing it. I explain the process. But as I was saying, the slightly unscrupulous ways of doing it is to get this light heads of terms, where they start with this big number. Wah, abracadabra, look at a big number, sign the paper. And what happens is there is then a process that they go through bit by bit by bit, where they are finding problems, knocking that price down. Oh, here there's tax, and all this is deferred, and all the net working capital is huge. And if you've never sold a business before, going through this process, I can tell you from someone that's been on the other side, and I had a decent company on the other side of me that were just going through a standard professional process. I felt like it was just death of 1,000 cuts, getting worse and worse and worse as you went through this process, where you felt like you're being chipped on the price. But this is totally normal. It's just that I didn't understand it. So, deals that work on often on a cash-free, debt-free basis. So I'm going to use really basic terms. Let's say the business is worth £5 million. If you agree a deal and go, oh my God, I got £5 million. Now, if that business has got £1 million of debt in it, that comes off the purchase price. If you've got surplus cash after doing your net working capital calculation, which is typically it's about everything. Net working capital, I won't go into too much technical detail, but it's the cash, it's the stock, let's think of it as the obligations that the business needs to meet in the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it might be. You do a calculation on that. You take out any of the finance costs, and if you've got a good cash pile in businesses, and you'd be surprised how many businesses have got a very healthy cash pile, like millions sometimes, and anything that's left over after you take those costs away and that debt away is surplus cash. Now that gets added back on. So if your surplus cash was, let's say 3 million, you've lost 1 million of your debt, 5 down to 4, but your 3 million surplus cash means actually they'll be taking 7 million on day one. It's a very useful tool to understand, but it can also go the other way. So I like to do, even before DD, some form of analysis on the financials that I could take the owner through and go, look, I want you to understand what this is going to look like. And I actually flow through a quasi kind of completion statement that shows them what it could look like based on the balance sheet that I've got now and the financial data I've got from them. Now, of course, it can change and there could be some big swings in the business, but by and large, you can be there or thereabouts, but at the very least, illustrate how that deal really works. I advise them to go and get some professional tax advice on what the tax implications are for them in their personal situation. Will they qualify for any, as it is now, business asset disposal relief, a relief that is slowly going down in terms of its taper, so the cost is going up to dispose. Obviously, capital gains has gone up. These things aren't going to come down anytime soon. So it's important people understand the most tax efficient way. If a business is owned, let's say, by a husband and wife, great news. It means that you both get your own allowances on BADR, and actually it's the first £2 million that up until April this year would still be taxed at just 10% each on capital gains tax on a disposal. Certainly in the UK, obviously different rules apply everywhere. So once we've gone through all that process and we think this is worth continuing with, that's officially what I then class as an opportunity. Only at that point do I really say it's an opportunity. And I've currently got 3 of those going on right now, from a January outreach to about 1,000 businesses, lots and lots of calls off the back of it, but 3 opportunities. Going back over the last year, lots of things happened. I met loads of companies. One of them completely by accident. Shortly after I started the Dragon Diaries, I was very early on in this process, and I was actually getting a demo of a data platform to use for data that I wanted to use for deal origination. And I found this data company, and it blew me away, because I'd seen so many companies by this point, so many pieces of software, so many platforms, that I knew what I was looking at was genuinely fantastic. Now, I always believe that opportunities come into your life all the time, but I don't think many people know when an opportunity's hit them. So they go, oh, I've got rotten luck. I never get any chances or opportunities. I think everyone gets exactly the same level of opportunities. It's just not everyone can recognize it as an opportunity. I looked at this data platform and I could have just thought, oh, great platform, it's what I've been looking for. But what I actually said to the guy that was talking to me is, tell me about this business. Who owns it? What's the structure? How far along your journey are you? Is this new? Is this old? Are you revenue generating? Are you profit making? They shared a fair bit of information with me. Suffice it to say, 2 hours later, I found myself on a call with the managing director of that business. Really good guy, very interesting backstory, but they were in trouble. They'd had many rounds of seed funding. It was a bit of a shame, really, because it was friends and family rounds, then there's some other investments in there, but they had like 200 small investors in this business who ultimately they needed more money. It was a cash call coming up in 3 to 5 months, and no one wanted or could afford to put any more money in. The MD was pulling his hair out because he put all his money as engineering and academic people, I find in a number of cases, do, without focusing on the number one thing, which is getting profitable, getting sales done. They made attempts on it, but they just hadn't put enough effort in. Way more effort went into the platform than the sales. So they found themselves in real trouble. That was the start of a great learning lesson for me. So last April, with the help of a good friend of mine who, if he's watching, will know who he is, and my thanks to him. But with the help of some introductions, I managed to get 5 complete strangers, other than one, to commit £5 million into forming an investment consortium to buy this business and provide a runway of cash to get it to where we thought we could take it. And we had a lot of skills and experience between us in that group. And it wasn't something I wanted to do on my own. It was too big for that. The market size and opportunity was way too big. And I still think it was a great call in identifying that opportunity. And clearly, so did these people that I brought into the consortium. Even wealthy people do not part with their cash easily to someone that they don't know. So it was an amazing week that I learned a lot from. I got a great buzz. You're probably guessing from the way I'm talking about it that unfortunately it fell the wrong way. I genuinely, to this day, think the founder of that business made a mistake in not taking us up on our offer. But the only way we could do it was to be highly dilutive. Now, the fact we were putting 5 million cash in did mean that there was a 5 million value to that business. So whilst it was dilutive, the business did reflect that increased value there on a balance sheet. But it needed a lot of cash. So we weren't going to go and buy out all the other shareholders and relieve them of their problem, which was actually one of the consortium kind of really made a point on this. And I'd gone into it thinking slightly differently, but he convinced me, and it made so much sense that actually we're taking all the risk, we're putting all this money in. We can't afford for that money not to be used to grow it in the way we wanted to. So it was really, really exciting experience. It failed, but another great learning lesson. Another good learning lesson was a company that was really small. Well, it was about 2.2 million turnover. Very low operating profit, around sort of 200,000. Actually, when you took some of the ad backs, the owner wasn't taking a full salary, wasn't charging quite market rent. It looked pretty marginal, like £100,000. But I thought, I like it. I want to get a deal done. It's not going to be expensive because it's such a small business. And I, again, spent yet more money, another 1,000 here and 1,000 there, and another heads of terms. Because the owner had agreed verbally to the offer, got the heads of terms done, we'd agreed it, and then he turned around and said, nah, I can't do it. My wife said I'm not allowed to do it, which is a bit weak. I think I would have preferred it if he'd taken that one on the chin and said that he changed his mind. But that kind of saved me that one. I look back on that now and think, thank God I did not buy that business, because the reality is even a small business will take the same amount of transaction cost, maybe not quite as much, but it will still need all the due diligences, all the legal contracts, the transaction costs, the stamp duty, all of your time, worry, effort. That's just to get the deal done. Once you've got the deal done, you are going to probably be speaking to that very small business exactly the same things you'd be speaking to your £1 million EBITDA business around processes and people and metrics and HR and all the stuff that I went through in 2018. And you'll need to take a lot of these acquisitions through in terms of getting them back to life, taking them from what could be a great business but a bit sleepy, a bit unloved, a bit neglected by the owners, into something that's shiny, that gets people on a journey and excited again. And you'll spend the same sort of time and money and resources on that small business. It was something that had already been in my mind, but I got tempted because of the pressure of wanting to get my first deal done. But that was a big savior. They were two standouts for me. I've tried to buy a telematics business that was on and off for many, many months. Good founder. We never managed to quite get a deal agreed. That is kind of locked up, sealed, and got its concrete boots at the bottom of the river, because we've tried a few times, and I just don't think we're going to make that happen. I think they've actually got a deal agreed with someone else now. I don't know if that's proceeded, but that was a good one. It was in a sector of expertise for me, which is something that I would consider doing. If you've got experience in a certain sector, it's a good area to go into for obvious reasons. If you're a business owner, then clearly there's great opportunities, because you've got the experience as a business owner making decisions, which is going to really stand you in good stead if you want to acquire a business. But you've also got the opportunity to get more exposure into the same sector you are, or you can buy up or down the supply chain. So you might buy a customer that's got exposure to a market that you want to get exposure to and get their margins instead of the ones you supply. You may want to buy a supplier that perhaps their supply of goods is very important to you, and actually you want to secure your supply chain whilst get access to other people, perhaps in other geographies or other sectors that also sell what you do. Or you might just buy clients, and client books are going to come back to this later, to expand the business that you've already got and grow your profit faster than you could organically. All good reasons to do it. So once we found the opportunity that we want to go ahead with, what do we do then? Well, I finally found that opportunity after much door knocking in July of 2024. Actually, this is funny because this was actually I didn't think this was a good discovery call. To me, I came off the discovery call for this particular company thinking, oh goodness me, this is never going to work out. The guy seems to really, not be someone that's open to it. He's been tarred by a bad experience of a sale that went wrong before, 68 years old, was a bit fed up with it, no time wasted, had these ideas of what he wanted to do. And I kind of did what I always do, which is really just explain the process, how it works. This is how things get bought. This is what's typically involved. I've subsequently found out he thought I was the first person that actually knew what they're talking about, and not full of crap like others, which made me laugh because I certainly got a different impression. But he actually had a corporate finance advisor, or I should say an ex-corporate finance advisor of a large accountancy, a big sort of top 6 accountancy firm in the UK, who'd retired or semi-retired, but was doing some of this work on a consultancy basis. And actually the corporate finance guy, which normally I'm thinking if I'm in the same room as a corporate finance guy, one of us is in the wrong room, because corporate finance tend to represent larger businesses than ones that I'm typically going for. I'm somewhere, if it's one of the small brokers, I don't tend to like dealing in that kind of market for reasons I won't bore you with now, but I really don't have a lot of joy talking to broker represented businesses. Then you have a gap potentially where there's not a lot of people representing to a certain point, and then of a certain size business, maybe £1 million EBITDA is enough. You get corporate finance. Corporate finance are a very different beast to brokers. They know what they're talking about. They're professional. They provide good figures. But the difference is, and they have a much higher sale rate. With brokers, you might be 10 to 20% of businesses get sold with brokers. Corporate finance people will tell you it's 50 to 60%. But one of the big differences, if I'm absolutely honest with you, is corporate finance people will not take on a business that can't generate the fees they need to make that worthwhile, which means it's got to be big enough, and it's got to be a sector that they think they can get their teeth behind and they've got clients for and can sell. It really is that straightforward. And if you were to have an honest conversation with them, they'd probably admit the same thing to you. There's no point taking on business you can't do something with. So I don't think it's really a dirty secret. But I found myself talking to a corporate finance advisor, and the firm was the one that I've ultimately ended up acquiring, SGH Molds, which I acquired at the back end of last year, November 2024. So he acted as a really great mediator on those early days while we started getting around tables and looking at numbers, the corporate finance guy. And this was SGH Molds is still, I guess, really, because it's early days, but it really was that like epitome of a sleepy business that had paper processes. People did things because they'd always done them that way. And yet at the core of it, they had a really good set of clients. They had really good standards. You never hear customers complain about what they produce, how they do it. So it had a really good set of ingredients, a fundamentally excellent business with great people working in it and with great clients in it. That's really, really important to me, because if everything's perfect before you buy it, not only are you losing some opportunity, but I come across businesses. I came across one in January, actually, and I even put an offer on it, which was a really well sorted business. Like, they'd spent ages tinkering with everything and making it just right. And it was a lovely, lovely platform. But what it didn't have was good sales. So it was kind of like, in my mind, I was thinking, I think I said on a Dragon Diaries video, it's kind of like the Orient Express, but with hardly any passengers on it. It's like, it's great, but hey, there's this thing over here you're missing. It's called sales, which is honestly typical of so many companies that I come across. But they put huge amount of value on what they'd done because it was valuable to them. Now, I'm the first to admit there is a strategic value in bringing a business that just needs sales. But from a buyer's point of view, it's far more quantifiable to say, I need this amount of time, this amount of investment. And I know it's hard, I'm not diminishing it, but I'm pretty sure I can put a timeline of getting the business from here to this point. It's quantifiable. Whereas adding sales, all you need to do, mate, is just add sales. Yeah, well, that is the bit that's really unquantifiable. How long is it going to take you? How long is it going to take to be successful? And can the company continue to survive if it lost another one or two big clients? In the case of this one I saw in January, it was actually, I think it was in a far riskier position than the owner realized it was. They'd already lost a big client. They'd lost a third of their turnover. One more of those clients in an industry that has a sales pipeline of 12 to 18 months, they would have been in serious trouble. And my offer reflected that fact. But we didn't get anywhere with it. So going back to SGH, all of those things that I've described that sound quite negative about it being quite sleepy, actually a great opportunity, because unlike the private equity that don't want to go into businesses with all that kind of risk, because it seems really alien. It's like they're not going to go and run it. They're not going to, what happens when that founder goes out? Well, having done that for so long myself, I knew what was involved in getting that business ready to go, and I'm prepared to take that risk on in places that others wouldn't. Not silly risk, but good calculated risk. And that's what I did with SGH. It took quite a while backwards and forwards on the offer, which is totally normal. The structure of the deal, quite crucial as well. So the people get focused on multiples, etc. It's about what the owner needed, when they needed it, and how we got the balance right between getting as close to what they wanted as possible, but over the time frame that made sense as well. So we then go into the transaction phase of acquisition. And this comes back to the people, right? You are going to need a team of people. You would be a fool to get into a business without paying for the right people to be involved in doing due diligence, for example. So you're going to need a few key areas on your deal team. You're going to need the financial people. The financial people have already hopefully looked at your model. Maybe they've done some cash flow modeling. They've done some fund flow modeling to help you understand what it would look to own that business over a period of time. Now they're moving into financial due diligence, which also incorporates tax due diligence. Now in smaller companies, VAT and PAYE are two big areas that you need to look into and can tell you lots and lots of information about that business. But you need to look at the whole lot, because if you miss something, especially if illegals aren't then airtight as well, it could cost you an awful lot of money. And if you were to, for example, pay everything on day one, you've got no opportunity. Good luck getting your money back from that owner. You're going to have to repo the Ferrari. So you need to get that finance side done. That in its own right can cost quite a lot of money. It depends on the size of the deal, but even on small deals, you could be looking at anywhere from £15,000 to £40,000, depending on the complexity of the deal. You need to get legal due diligence done. So they are the people that are going to actually take your heads of terms, and they're going to turn it into transaction documentation, namely the share purchase agreement. Depending on who's involved in the business afterwards, you're going to need a shareholders agreement. You're going to need probably a property lawyer to come into that as well. Leases, I'll come back to that specifically in a minute. But you're going to have probably HR representation from the law firm as well. They are assembling a data room and getting all this information from the customer, from the vendor. One of the learning points for me actually is due diligence. I say this really early on to people now, is that the timeline of us going from heads of terms to completion, so much of that timeline is going to be dictated by your ability to respond to data room and due diligence questions, requests for information that go into the data room as quickly as possible. You're going to look at all of this, and one line on a due diligence could take you 3 days to return to. It's a very, very stressful process for the vendor to go through. I'm sitting there waiting for the information, and once it comes in, I start analyzing it, and obviously the team start analyzing it. But this is very stressful for the vendor. And as soon as they think they've got a section done, oh God, done, right, move on to the next. But before they've even finished the next point, the solicitors have come back and asked a further question on the point that they've already answered. I've been on that side of it, and it is exhausting. But if you can knuckle down and get onto that, you're going to get a shorter timeline. We were a little bit slow on our timeline. It took longer than expected, given that we signed heads in July, didn't complete to the end of November. There were other reasons. There was a compliance issue. We had to get approval from the Foreign Office on that deal. But nonetheless, get early on certain points. So as well as the deal team and the data room, what you need to think about due diligence is property. Specifically, I'm going to talk about property because leases are they will go on their own time, right? You've got to deal with landlords. The landlord might actually be the current vendor of the business. If they own the property, it might be their pension fund. Word to the wise, if it is their pension fund, that you can't do deals that involve messing around with the lease value to make up for a loss of value elsewhere. I mean, the pension fund have got a legal obligation to administer that pension as they see fit, not the vendor, even if it's the vendor who owns the property in a pension fund. So that is one specifically also to watch out for. But these things can take months. So this is one of the variables. Day one, you get onto emphasizing the due diligence and leases, or freehold if you're also acquiring the business as part of the deal, which some people will want to do. Things like HR, a bit more predictable. They will be well within normally. They're not going to be the longest items. Legal and property often are. You want to agree on post-exit terms with that vendor. So if you want them involved in some way post-transaction, or even if you don't, you're going to need some kind of agreement. Not everyone does this, but I will always insist on a settlement agreement for the outgoing vendors. So you create a settlement agreement, or as it's called now, a compromise agreement, is effectively them signing into confidentiality. It's about the conditions around termination of employment, and it includes things like they're not harboring any cases of any form of misconduct or anything like that. Because I know it sounds crazy, but I've actually heard a story of someone who sold their business and was kept on as an employee post employment, and then sued for unfair dismissal to the new owner. I know it's a bit of a horror story and it's not likely to happen very often, but one of the nice things about a compromise agreement is that if the vendors, and often I'd like to do this for the senior team in that business as well, if they've got any grievances of any sort, the compromise agreement makes sure that comes out during the process, as well as neat and tidily tying up the employment. I mean, let's face it, if in the case of that vendor that sued the new buyers, if they've been working in a business for 20 years, it could be quite some considerable sum of money, even if it was like a redundancy, for example. That's also been something that's happened. So that's an area in HR to think about. So one of the other things I would just say about during the transaction process is you're going to need to unblock the process or unblock the solicitors at some point. This is quite important. So you're going to need to step in to have difficult conversations. The way a transaction tends to go is you start off and everything's great and you've got heads of terms done and you're like, oh, we've got to talk about all these things. There's a list of 10 really important items, but 4 of them are really like challenging things to talk about. Well, guess what you focus on first? Yeah, it's the easy ones. You knock them off. So what happens as you go through the end of transaction? Well, you get to the end of transaction and now you've got the 4 really difficult ones that are going to be contentious and they're going to be argued over, and you're all the way towards the end of the transaction, and suddenly red lines are getting drawn and people are walking away, and you need to bring that stuff that involves variables right up to the front of the conversation. What are going to be the difficult things in a deal? And you're going to need to be pragmatic. You need to understand the things that you don't like but you can live with, versus the things that are genuine red lines, because people start drawing these red lines. Oh, if we do that, I'm not going forward, I'm dropping out the process. I mean, no one wants to do that. The vendor's already considered life post-sale. You've already incurred, and both of you will have incurred fees, but the buyer, trust me, the buyer fees are a lot more than the seller's fees, typically double. So you're on the hook for a lot of money. And these red lines started getting drawn at points in that transaction. It was difficult. I was already at that point probably £90,000 in fees. It's not easy to consider walking away. But on the other hand, it's even worse to do a deal that you've got to live with for years because of it. So you're in this impossible position where you're losing a huge amount of money on transaction fees if it goes south, or you're making a decision that you've got to live with forever. So you do need to sort these issues out. but it does force you to be a bit more pragmatic. I don't think anyone gets through a deal, at least if they've had proper due diligence, or they just don't understand the business well enough, without having some really tough decisions to make. During the very end of that deal, while we're waiting for this compliance clearance, the budget came out. Made it less favourable for the vendors because their capital gains instantly went up 5%. It also meant, from my point of view, that we'd already found out. Obviously, the stat accounts ran to March, and actually in April there was a 10% raise to the national minimum wage, which some of the people in the team were affected by. And then, of course, in the last budget, they just announced the national minimum wage, the national insurance contributions. There was an effective additional increase of 16% coming in next April. Now, we'd already let the sort of 10%, we just decided to be pragmatic about that during the transaction. But then when this budget came out, suddenly we were all worried that they would pull out because corporate, capital gains tax would go through the roof. And now it was us going 10% then, 16% went. Oh, this is a big swing in value in this business, especially when you apply a multiple to it. That deal really nearly went, off the rails in a few places. And I don't think it was a particularly unusual deal from that point of view. So it will happen. In addition to that, by the way, I've done 5 other minority investments to date, in addition to SGH Molds. That's small positions in large or early stage businesses. You can see more details on jalex.uk, or check out my LinkedIn profile, which is Peter-Thompson-Jalex, Jalex. But it includes Green Jets. I'm really excited about Green Jets. Fantastic company, electrifying of aviation turbines. I think they're going to be a unicorn. If you're watching Anmol, make it happen, friend. Oatman, which is a sort of a regional chain of about 27 pubs and restaurants. The Whole Group, which I've gone into with a couple of friends of mine. Very exciting business, SaaS-based reseller, but great track record, like the Whole Group. Silicon Roundabout, a chap called Francesco, that he is effectively, I'm an LP, a limited partner in a fund that he created around deep tech, venture capital fund. It was something I really wanted to have exposure to. I kind of liked the way he worked. He had a great network of deal flow, and knowing what I knew that this network he built up in the Silicon Roundabout over many years had thousands of tech professionals in it that were all going, here's what we're doing, here's the network, here's the idea, can you help us raise any money? And one day he just went, I think I need to be the one helping you raise the money. There's a business here. And he founded Silicon Roundabout Ventures as his VC fund. So he's the GP, I'm an LP in it. And finally, but by no means least, a little indie game studio, again with a team in it that's got a great track record in big studios, a company called Chaotic Works. So they're my minorities. So lastly, finance. I think finance is interesting. People are going to want to know about this. How do we do it? What money do I need to buy a business? Do I need to be wealthy? No, you don't. But on the other hand, I don't believe all the hype that says you don't need a pound in the bank either, because there are risks involved with buying a business. There are some things, transaction fees are a great one, where you can't get out of that. So there are people out there that will conduct, not many, but there are people that will do their due diligence or their legal fees, and they will do it in payment in lieu to go through on the transaction and the money to come from the business you've acquired to pay their fees. A contingent basis, as it's known. Now, that's all well and good, but as I just described to you in the transaction I recently went to, things really could have fallen to the wayside on that one. And if you do that, and my final fees in there were well into 6 figures, especially by the time you take into account stamp duty, etc. If that transaction fails, who's going to pay that bill? Well, it's not going to be the company that you were meant to be buying, because that's not happened. It's you. And what does that mean then? What behavior does that create if you are in that situation? Well, the only answer really is that you're going to do a deal at any cost, however unfavorable it is, because you can't afford to back out. So even if nothing else, you need to be able to afford transaction fees on the first acquisition that you're buying. I mean, it's as simple as that. You need to be able to do it, or you need a wig and a prayer and a lot of luck and a hope that you're not going to go bankrupt in the process, because there is going to be some ramifications if you can't pay your bills. So things like group structure that I won't go into too much here because this video is already really going on a long time. Apologies, but group structures will provide some protection, etc. But lawyers are not stupid, and that, given their corporate lawyers, they're all about group structure and reducing liability. So they're certainly going to make sure that their liabilities not reduced and your ability to make fee payments is met. So just be aware of that. You also need a lot of time. I've explained a lot about the process. It's very time consuming. Listen, I don't by any means work a full day. There are some days like this week, I've done days where I got up at 6 and I literally had my last meeting finished at 10 at night, and I had a couple of days like that, just crazy. But today I didn't start work, which was really a catch up with a friend of mine who's doing the same as what I'm doing. So hello, Andrew Thrigold, if you're watching. And we caught up for an hour, and I've done a few hours after that this afternoon, and that's it. And tomorrow I've got no meetings except for a lunch with another friend of mine who's just done a £1 billion deal, which I can't wait to catch up with. So yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it. So that's not bad, is it? But you're going to need a lot of time to do this. This process is not just money, and you're going to need money here, there, and everywhere. You want to get heads of terms done. You want to get a contract done. You want to do a small bit of this, that, and the other. You need to open bank accounts. There's deal origination, phone calls, discovery calls. Yes, you could do it alongside another job. A lot easier if that other job happens to be your own business. But if you're in employment, you're going to have to think really seriously about how you make the time to do something like this and whether you can really be committed, because I think otherwise you're in danger of starting something that realistically you don't have a chance of finishing for either time or financial resources. Now, in my case, I had capital that I wanted to invest. I want to have skin in the game. I keep saying I might be wired wrong, but I need skin in the game to feel the risk, to feel the motivation. I really, when I go and buy a business, I want the people that are left in that business to know this matters to me. So I know there's a lot of people talking about no money down, etc. I get it. And yes, it's technically possible to do that to an extent. Doesn't mean no payments are made. It means leveraging the assets of the business to help get the vendor out of the business. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking, wait a minute, you're just, you're raising funds or you're getting my business to pay for itself, and they take some sort of exception to that. But the reality is for the people doing that, and to some extent most deals involve that, is what kind of investment doesn't pay for itself? Why would anyone buy something which couldn't pay for its own purchase? And I don't buy this locking up capital so that in 10 years time you get a return. Well, what if the business hasn't grown? It's yielded no income, it hasn't paid for itself, and in 10 years time you don't get a return. Well, anyone knows that the value of £1 today is going to be a lot less in 10 years time. You lost a lot of money. You've got to find a balance where it's worthwhile the vendor getting out of the business, and it's worthwhile you getting into the business. For me, I have a very clear profile on how soon that business needs to pay for itself, and it directly aligns with those multiples of the business, which means it's not just about EBITDA for me, it's about free cash flow, its ability to repay its debt, whether I am the debtor, as I am on this first purchase, or whether or not I use external finance, which I undoubtedly will in the future. As I said, I want to deploy it so I've got personal skin in the game. But it's also, it's not a bad structure either. I mean, I have a holdco, I've got SPVs, I loan money into my top co. I don't introduce it as capital. I loan it in on a commercial rate of interest. So it's just the same as directors who take money out of their business on a director's loan. As most people will know, you have to pay that back before the year end. Otherwise, you will get something called withholding tax and have to pay a fair rate of interest on what it is you borrowed, which can be very expensive. The same works the other way around. When I'm lending money to my top co, I lend it a fair rate of interest, which, because the interest rates have been high, is in double digits. So I'm actually making a good yield on my investment in something that I have control over and I back myself to do, and not in an equity market or sort of crypto where I just sitting there crossing my fingers and hoping someone else is doing well for me. So I wanted to deploy my money for that reason. But because I do it on a commercial basis, my forecasting models and my cash models mean that I know that if I need to swap from my capital to an external finance provider, my models work just as well. So it's you know it's done to be it's done to stand the test of time and stand the rigors of analysis. And all of our models are really pretty pessimistic. You don't want to be sitting there going, "Oh, if everything goes the right way, I'll break even or maybe take a salary." As the reality is you need to make sure that business can withstand some shocks, which are inevitably some shocks will happen post ownership. That's for sure. So you need the ability to withstand that. But on the other hand, for all I've said there about these, leveraging and the business has got to be balanced, it's got to pay me back, is I don't expect to personally make any money out of that business whilst I'm paying the vendors back. So that's the fair trade-off. I won't make any money until I've paid them off. They get all the proceeds of that business in most cases, all that free cash flow and perhaps more is going to them over that period. So typical deal shape for me, well, I mean, it really varies. There's one I made, an offer I made earlier this month was for 90% upfront. I'd never do that normally, but there was a reason I wanted to make it a little bit more compelling for them. I'd never do more than 90% because I always need to hold something back, because if I do discover a shock post sale that didn't come out in DD, or if let's say they've even fraudulently done an incorrect tax return, for example, they are liable for that under what's called warranties that are in the transaction documentation. If I've given them 100% of the money, not getting that back, am I? So we hold that back to be able to set off, as it's called, against disputes that may come down the line where they're in clear breach of some sort of term or are found to be. So post-acquisition, ownership. Like, it's early days, so I don't have too much to talk about in this section of Be Relieved. I'm nearly at the end here. It's early days, but things feel really positive. But it's not quantitative at the moment. It's very hard for me to be able to point at all the figures and say why it's positive. I mean, I can look at the bank account and it looks good, but without the sort of cash flow forecasting in the future, I don't know whether that's good or not at the moment. But I do know there's so much opportunity to go at, improving the business. There's a benefit there for the clients and the staff members. The clients may not have realised that the business was under some risk. I'm not saying for any reason that anything would have happened and the business would have just got shut down. But you can't ignore the risks of someone that's getting beyond retirement age still running a business. That's actually a risk to the clients that we've now taken away for them. They are going to see some very clear changes in the way that business runs, none in the quality of the product or what they're getting, because it was already really good. I'm not taking anything away from that, but they are going to see benefits. They're going to see a more active engagement with ourselves, more account management, more of us looking for further opportunities and looking to delight them in other ways. So, businesses can be sleepy and actually you might think that people don't want that change to happen within the business. Our experience so far has been very much the opposite. Actually, people have felt a bit neglected, not on an obvious level. They enjoyed working there and they really liked the owners, but there was a slight sense of things being neglected around the business, reinvestment, visual things like refurbishments, which we've started already, or training of the individuals in the business, caring about their contracts. It's like, it can make a real difference, some of the things that may seem really obvious if you're used to running a business. But a great team's really important, and we've got that. We've really got good people in there that genuinely care about that business, and the tenure in there reflects that. They've got people that are there for decades and have seen so many changes over that time, and they're getting reinvigorated too. Probably my best move in terms of what I made a decision to do early on, and again, this was a risk. It was many thousands of pounds risk, was actually taking the initiative to hire a managing director for that business before the transaction had completed. So I probably would have had a £15,000 bill that I would have been responsible for if the transaction had gone, on top of all my other transaction fees. But so yeah, it was a risk, but it was one of the best things I did. I found a great MD, a chap called Martin Jones, runs SGH Molds. He's really enthusiastic, great energy, exactly a reflection of the kind of person that I wanted to run that business, kind of person that I think I am. And so he's my ambassador in that business. I leave him alone to get on with it. We have a catch up once a week. We had our first board meeting earlier this week, which we're doing once a month. and we speak on the phone, reasonably regularly. So there for him, he's there for me, but I can leave him to go on and do what he does. And he's got a wealth of experience in the industry. It's just brilliant, because that allows me to maintain the red lines when I set this business up. Is that I don't want to I've done my 90, 100-hour weeks for many years. I've done the startup hustle culture. I've done the startup fail culture, just about survive culture, and then do really well, but so sort of exhausted I can't sleep properly, worrying about stuff or thinking about stuff. I've done it all. And I want a different kind of life now, a life where every morning for me is getting up and I do loads of exercise. I swim and I run and I go to the gym and I love my coffee and I sit down and a natter with Mrs. Thompson over a cup of tea first thing. So I really don't want to lose that. And the best way to do it would be to start doing a business like a startup. Because, and this is, I think, is a good advice, is when one of the reasons founders find it really hard to sell, and one of the reasons it's such a risk when you take them out, is they do so much within the business and did for so many years before they were forced to get other people doing other jobs, is their level of skills and knowledge was improving every day, every week, every month, every year, to the point where they knew so much, to such in-depth level about everything in the business, everything, that they became almost irreplaceable. Certainly would take a few people. And many of those people think they are irreplaceable and that they can't. They've tried to get people to come in and run the business to allow them to step back, and they failed. And that's why they want to sell the business, because they can't see any other way out than to hand this over to someone else. And the real irony, and I know this from personal experience as well, is the penny drops when you've sold it and you realize it was you holding you back the whole time. I'm not denying it makes it hard. And so when I started Jalex Futures, I was running it for quite a few months before I suddenly went, hey, I'm developing the deal origination, the CRM, I'm doing the outreach, I do all the discovery calls, I'm doing the data. I went, I'm starting to build a legacy I won't be able to extract myself from. So I took steps pretty early on to get people in to help me to do things, to outsource stuff, to make the business not dependent on me. I do the razzmatazz. I like to go to the meetings, I find the businesses, I love to, and I'm genuinely interested, and I genuinely love doing those meetings, and I love negotiations, I love the offers and doing all of that, and I am going to be a part of that business going forward, but it would not be operational and not be day-to-day, and I'm trying to make sure I'm the same thing within Jalex Futures. My wife, for example, is a bookkeeper here. She helps me with travel and arranging stuff as well, but we also get her accounting support and other stuff. So neither of us are tied, and we get to live that work-life balance. And Martin was really important to me to be able to do that in SGH Molds, and that was always what I intended, and I will do that with any business I acquire. I will not get involved or meddle with that business from day one. It will have a dedicated person in there that's going to live, eat, and breathe it. So what do we do with the ownership once we bought it? What are the key things? Well, in the words of a friend of mine, in fact, I can't say who it was, because otherwise you'll know the title of his new book that is going to be coming out shortly, and it's called "It's Not Rocket Science." I had dinner with him a few nights ago. I like the name because I think it sums it up fairly well. Not being rocket science doesn't mean it's not hard and it doesn't require tenacity. But what he really means is there's a whole set of things that most businesses need, and a lot of businesses don't do, that really move the needle and get that thing running in a different way. I had a saying that I will use here, and this is around metrics and monitoring, which is really important. Is you can't improve what you can't measure. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So metrics and monitoring and KPIs is really important. So like I said earlier, I know what cash is in the bank, but what does that mean? What are our sales? What are our sales by product, by customer, by product, by service? What's the geography? What's our largest customer concentration? What's the efficiency and uptime of our machines, our staff? How many shots do we waste when we're doing plastics? What's the next 12-week cash flow forecast? What does that look like extended over a year? What bills are coming up? What debtor days have we got? What stock days have we got? What's the turn? I could go on and on, but the point is, it's easily summed up by me saying, and I said this the other day, and I think I'm going to keep it, is how close does the iceberg need to be before we spot it? That's what metrics do. obviously it's a Titanic reference, but I think it's apt, and I think people in all areas of the business could understand the need to spot the iceberg and take action to divert course and not hit it and not sink the ship. And that's why we need metrics. There's also systems. Systems will be improving SGH, but it's similar across all businesses. Look at it. The quicker you get that system working for everyone in the business, you understand who's double entering data into different places, who's got overlap, where the system's disjointed, where it needs to pick up from here to here and then input over there, and then we produce an invoice there, but the actual billing comes out of there, like crazy stuff. And then the production planning is a big part of that in this business. So we'll be providing end-to-end systems in there that literally mimic the customer flow from start to finish. Is it a pain? Is a little bit. But is it going to revolutionize that business like you would not believe? And everyone is going to love their job so much more because it's so much easier. The clients are going to be able to get data so much quicker and easier. Everything's going to be better. And I've got a little tip for you here on systems, because I've been through a number of quite major system migration projects myself at Cantrack and elsewhere. Often the hardest bit of any system is getting all the crap from the systems you've got into the new system. I like a different approach. I've done that. It can work, but it really makes it a lot harder. So I've got a different approach, and that is put the new system in place. From that day forward, do the business in that system, and simultaneously operate the old system for your legacy stuff. Now, does that create a short-term additional burden? Yes, but the time it will save you, and you won't have to build all these imperfections into your new system to take account of your old crap data and your old crap processes. That is all legacy. Every day that passes, that old system becomes less and less relevant, to the point where you can archive it and say, look, if we ever need to get something, it's there, but the business going forward is on this system. If you are able to do that, you will thank me for doing that. One last thing in terms of the sense of purpose and the team and the new ownership is, actually, it was an interesting book, and I bought this book for Martin before he even started working at SGH, but I knew we'd be on a similar mindset here, and it's something that I learned a long time ago, quite a few years ago now, which is one of the things that was holding me back from developing the business was being the font of all knowledge and always working. So I would answer the questions before anyone else had a chance to, and I knew the answers, and it created a lack of interest in people wanting to step up, because I did it so quickly and answered so thoroughly. They just stopped bothering. So me wondering why I had trying to grow management and a team that weren't responding, well, actually I was the one that was getting in the way of them doing that. So I took a conscious step back. It's very important to explain you're doing that. I did so. And then I started saying, right, from now on, when you ask me a question, I need you to have thought about what the answer is. So in future, you're going to say, I've got this problem. It's not a question. I've got this problem, and here is what I'm suggesting we do about it. And most of the time, I just say, yeah, sounds good. Even if I thought I might have a better way, I just say, yeah, sounds good, because I'm building trust with them about the fact that I trust in their ideas and their solutions. And then we could learn some lessons at a later point. And I felt this was really, really well documented in a book called Turn the Ship Around by David Market. And he was a captain of a nuclear submarine. So in the military, people do as they are ordered, generally speaking. And he sensed the problem in that, in the sense that if people didn't understand their mission and their purpose, they could not adapt to your orders if they became outdated. If a situation arises in the military, they will carry out those orders, even if they know it's the wrong thing, because orders are orders. And he turned this ship around in terms of its standards of performance by making everyone understand the mission and their role in that mission. And then what he would set is a general objective and leave them to deliver it. And one of the key parts of that was turning around from asking or awaiting orders to saying, Captain, I intend to do X. Now, the captain will most of the time go very well, proceed. But it also offered the captain the opportunity to take that information, and if it was critical, interject and ask them to do something different. But that shift there in understanding the mission and doing it was absolutely vital. And I just thought, I'm going to send this book over to Martin and see what he makes of it. And I do recommend you read it. It's quite interesting. And it turned out his father was a submariner. or in the Navy, sorry. And we were totally on the same page. And that's why I hired him, because we need to start getting this sense of understanding the mission, why people are doing things in a certain way, so that the answer to when you say, why do you always print that and stick it there, is like, well, that's what we've always done. That's our process. To going, why do I need to print that out? Why do I need to stick it there? What is the correct way to deal with that piece of data, and how should we do it? Or whatever it may be. That could be really transformative for a company. I mentioned I spoke to Andrew Threadgold earlier. We have a little catch up every now and again, and this one came up. So in terms of last learning lesson from this, well, it's momentum. A year ago, or a little over a year ago, when I started the business, I was like moving a concrete square block, and I was rolling it from one side to the other. Momentum, people think about balls, and they start moving, and the more they move, the faster they go, and the easier it is to move them. But when you're starting something like this, it's more like a stone block, and you have to push it over from one side to the other. But over a very long time, day by day, the corners of that block get rounded. The rounded corners turn into an oval, or eventually you get your ball. And the point of that really is self-evident, but it's so hard to get going in something like this, and it takes tenacity, but it gets a little bit easier all the time. And you will get tired, you will find it a challenge, but you just got to keep going, and then you get momentum. And now here I am a year later. I think I feel genuinely competent. Like, I do know what I'm doing. I've got so much more to learn, but I've learned enough to be competent, and I've done that in a little over a year. And that's my experiences, and I hope that provides people some encouragement, but also a realistic expectation of how long it can take to do it. And that is consistently applying myself pretty much every day over that year. And that's the secret, is to get on, do it, be consistent, and keep doing it. So finally, to wrap up, you'll be pleased to hear, my goodness, is anyone still here? This is going to be one to pause and come back to, I'm sure, if anyone gets through it. So what's next? Well, I want 2 or 3 platform businesses. And what I mean by a platform business is SGH Molds that I've bought is a really solid, good, does millions of turnover, good profit levels, got spare capacity, and there's so much we can do to it. On that platform business, I would like to acquire people in different geographies, in different verticals, companies that got people the different skill sets that we do, and combine them into that platform business. So effectively, when I say I want 2 or 3 platform businesses, I want 2 or 3 businesses in different sectors that I can then acquire other businesses into to grow individually. So I end up with 3 kind of trunks, if you like, on the tree, and then branches off those trunks. So there's a couple of reasons for doing that. One, I think it'd be really interesting to get involved in multiple sectors. 2, I want to be careful and mindful about not buying businesses that are too concentrated in one sector. So great example would be, during COVID, Cantrack actually did really well. I mean, it was a very tough period, but financially we did really well. Whereas SGH, who we've just bought, it was a manufacturing business, and it went through a really torrid time, as a lot of companies did. So you want to try and diversify your risk into some different sectors, I would say. Now I've got a business in a particular sector, I can choose to acquire, but I can also do something that I haven't been able to do before, which is I can now go back and re-look at my data, and all the companies that were too small to include in my acquisition outreach, I can now bring in with a specific goal of acquiring assets from them. That might be fixed assets like machinery, but I'm primarily interested in client books. And in manufacturing, for example, in plastic injection tool making, you have these big steel tools, which are like can be tons of metal blocks, which are used to press the plastic to make the products. The tools are required to fulfill the customer orders. So for me, there's an opportunity. It kind of makes it a little bit of a stickier proposition. If you buy a client book, normally You have to really work hard to make sure you keep the client, which of course you do in any situation, but there's an added incentive here if we also have their tool and are able to produce parts and go, well, why don't you just give us a go and let us do this? So those companies that may otherwise have shut their doors because they're just too small to sell, owners retire. I think about something like 60% of retiring owners just shut their doors is what I heard. So for those people, it could be a great opportunity. And for us, I know very well, and most people in M&A who do this professionally and have done for a long time, there's a reason people do buy and builds and roll ups or whatever you want to call it. And that's because the profit is genuinely a lot easier to acquire than it is to build organically. I did it the long, slow road in Cantrack, and it did take a long time. Yes, it was very successful, but that stuff does not happen overnight. And I'd like to grow a little bit quicker through a mixture of acquisition and new sales. So that's going to be another thing that I am already focusing on now. In terms of the current market, obviously the Labour government has made some taxation changes last year. Everyone knows about it. It's not popular, but it has added to the sense of prevailing doom and gloom that is being felt by many, many business owners. And look, I get it. The UK outlook doesn't look good. The global outlook in many cases not great. Economically, politically, stability, the wars, I get it. It can be downbeat, but I think there's opportunities in every market, everywhere. And actually, the smaller you are, the more ability you've got to circumnavigate those challenges and to do something about it. Big companies do not always have that opportunity. They can't be so nimble. So if you have some faith in yourself and you've got a track record, now is a great time, because if someone's in their late 60s, they may have been through a heyday in their industry, and all they've seen since they started is more regulation, more compliance, more taxation, more this, more that. The industry's getting worse. I can understand it. It's kind of natural in many ways. I think anyone that's done anything for a long time feels like that. But the advantage you have coming in as a new acquirer into a new business sector is the landscape in front of you is the only landscape you've ever known. So whereas they think it's got much worse, well, that to me is just the landscape. And I just see the same opportunities as any new person coming in. A fresh set of eyes isn't just about being able to see how the business operates in a different way, but it's being able to see the environment in which the business operates in a different way to the owner and bring that enthusiasm into it. And I am really enthusiastic about manufacturing, for example, and that business report. I love it. It's a really cool business. And I think there's loads of opportunity out there, and I intend to go and take as much advantage as possible. So I've kind of taken you through how it started, deal origination, opportunities, transaction, ownership, what's next. And that brings us full circle right back to looking for the next acquisition and the start of all of this again, but with a little bit more experience, a few bruises and batters, but a great sense of optimism. This is January this year is the best I've felt about. I've enjoyed it all the way through, but I've got a sense of peace that's hard to describe now, that I really am enjoying what I'm doing. So thank you if you were stuck with the series that was on LinkedIn. And I know I get a lot of comments of people who watched it but don't like it or comment on it because of the fact that perhaps they own a business or they don't want people to know that they're looking at that content. I got loads of good feedback. So thank you if you watched that. And my goodness, thank you if you've managed to watch nearly an hour and a half of this content. I do hope it's been useful. It's going to be on YouTube. Time will tell if anyone else finds it interesting. But one day, I think I'm going to be looking back at this video with a smile on my face. And I can't help but think about who that person will be and what they would have done that looks back and watches this video in 20 years' time. Who knows? Good night.